Story 1. The Looping Morning. Sarah woke up one crisp, ordinary morning just like any other. The alarm clock buzzed at 7 a.m., pulling her from her sleep. She rubbed her eyes, stretched out her limbs, and climbed out of bed, feeling the familiar ache in her muscles from a restless night. Everything seemed normal. The light outside her window was soft, casting the usual glow of early morning on the walls. She grabbed her phone from the bedside table and checked the weather. Sunny, 65 degrees. Perfect. She let out a sigh and got up to start her day. As she moved to the kitchen, the sound of the coffee maker grinding beans filled the air. The comforting smell of fresh coffee brewing drifting into her senses. She poured herself a cup of her usual blend, took her first sip, and let out a contented hum. Sarah loved her mornings. They were always calm, predictable. The radio hummed softly in the background. It was set to her favorite station, one she always listened to while getting ready. The same song was playing, her favorite track that always put her in a good mood. The song played every morning, without fail, and this morning was no different. She stood there for a few moments, tapping her fingers on the countertop in time with the music. With her coffee in hand, she walked over to the front door, ready to start her day. But the moment she stepped outside, a feeling washed over her, a subtle, yet chilling sensation. It was as if the world itself was resetting. The air felt thick, almost frozen, and she felt a strange sense of familiarity, as though she had already done this exact thing moments ago. Shrugging it off, Sarah made her way toward her car. But then, she heard something peculiar. The song she had been listening to on the radio just moments earlier was playing again. It was the exact same song, the same lyrics, the same verse, even the same melody. How could that be? She paused in her tracks, her heart racing as she tried to process what was happening. She turned back around and walked back into the house, convinced she must have left the radio on by accident. But when she opened the door, there was nothing, no music, no sound. Just the quiet hum of her refrigerator and the normal background noises of the house. Confused, Sarah stood there for a moment, thinking that maybe her mind was playing tricks on her. Maybe it was just a coincidence, she thought. But as soon as she stepped outside again, there it was, the same song, playing once more in her ears, as if she had never left the house. It was like she had stepped into a parallel version of her reality, where everything was happening again. She checked her phone to see if maybe she had accidentally cued the song, but there was no sign of it. She was only hearing it in her headphones. She walked back inside and took them off, but when she stood at the door and listened, there was nothing. The silence in the house felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still. It was as if her mind was grasping for something that she couldn't quite catch. She put her headphones back in and, once again, the song started playing. How was this possible? Sarah felt her mind start to spiral. The same song, the same time of day, the same everything. She went through the motions, putting on her shoes, grabbing her bag, but it felt like she had already done this before. The same song, the same smells, the same actions. A strange déjà vu feeling gnawed at her, but no matter how many times she tried to alter her routine, every action kept bringing her back to the same point. It was as though time itself was repeating, cycling through the exact same moments over and over again. For the next few hours, Sarah couldn't escape the bizarre sensation of living in a loop. Every time she stepped outside, the song played again. Every conversation she had with her roommate felt familiar. Her steps, her movements, everything was a carbon copy of the moments before. She had seen this all happen. She knew what was coming next. But no matter how many times she tried to shake it off, it always reset. She went to the kitchen, made herself some toast, exactly the way she made it earlier. She took another sip of coffee, the same cup from earlier, even though she didn't remember refilling it. It was as though she was trapped in an endless loop of déjà vu, where every detail, every action, every word was being repeated without her control. At one point, she stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, staring at her reflection. Her movements were so synchronized with what she had done earlier, her hand running through her hair, the way she adjusted her blouse. Everything was so perfectly repeated. Was this really happening? She glanced at the clock. It was only 9 a.m. But somehow, she felt like it had been much longer. Every hour felt like it was compressed into a single moment. She tried to move faster, walk with more purpose, break the cycle. But every time she made a decision, it felt as if the universe was one step ahead of her, pulling her back to the same place, the same actions. As the hours dragged on, Sarah became desperate. She picked up her phone, scrolled through her social media, and even called her mother to tell her what was happening. But when she heard her mother's voice on the other end of the line, it felt like she had spoken those words before. Even the conversations were on repeat. Was she stuck in time? Had something gone wrong with reality? She walked back outside, and for the 100th time that morning, the song began to play in her headphones. The same verse, the same melody. But this time, it wasn't just the song, it was the realization that she was trapped in a never-ending loop of her own life. The world around her was repeating itself, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape it. Sarah never did figure out why she was stuck in that time loop. Was it a glitch in reality? A breakdown in the fabric of time? Or perhaps something deeper, something tied to the hidden mechanics of the universe? Whatever the cause, one thing remained clear. Sarah was forever caught in the loop, living the same morning, over and over again. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape it. Story 2. The Missing Hour. David was just an ordinary guy, living a simple life. It was an evening like any other. He'd finished his shift at work, and as he drove home, he decided to listen to his favorite podcast to unwind. The rhythmic hum of the car's engine mixed with the voice coming from the speakers, as the sun began to set and the streets grew quieter. David parked his car outside his house, the clock on his dashboard reading exactly 6:30 p.m. He stepped out of the car, stretched his legs, and made his way inside. The house was warm and inviting, just the way he liked it. After a long day, all David wanted was a cup of tea, a comfortable chair, and his favorite TV show to relax. He moved to the kitchen, boiling water for the tea, all while listening to the familiar sound of the podcast in the background. Everything felt normal, calm. With his tea ready, David settled into his living room chair. The TV flickered to life, and he immersed himself in the show. It wasn't anything too gripping, just the usual comedy series that helped him wind down. He sipped his tea, distracted by the laughter on screen, as time ticked away without him noticing. Or so he thought. After what felt like only a few minutes, he reached over to his coffee table to grab his phone and check the time. Maybe it was about time for another cup of tea, or perhaps it was nearly time to go to bed. He glanced at the clock on his phone, expecting it to show around 7 p.m., but to his shock, the time read 8:30 p.m. His heart skipped a beat. How could this be? Had he really been sitting there for 2 hours without realizing it? He immediately looked around, almost as if to check if something had changed around him, but everything looked the same. The TV was still playing the same show. The sound of the laughter still filled the room, the steam rising from his half-drunk cup of tea. Everything looked unchanged, except for the time. David's mind raced as he tried to recall what had happened in those 2 hours. He couldn't remember getting up. He couldn't remember switching shows, or even taking another sip of his tea. Nothing. It was as if those 2 hours simply didn't exist. They had vanished. A blank space in his memory. At first, he dismissed it as some sort of mental trickery. Maybe he had fallen asleep for a bit and didn't realize it. But the strange thing was, he felt fully awake the entire time. No grogginess, no feeling of waking up from a nap, just a strange sense of unease. To double-check, David reached for his wristwatch, a habit he had gotten into when he needed to confirm time during the evening. He checked it. The hands were in the same position as his phone's clock, confirming that it was, in fact, 8:30 p.m. 2 hours had indeed passed. But that wasn't all. The weirdest part of it all was that he didn't even know what he had done during those 2 hours. He had no memories of actions, thoughts, or feelings. It was like someone had hit a pause button on his life, and then just fast-forwarded it, erasing all the moments in between. Not even a fuzzy memory, just a blank. Feeling a bit unsettled, David tried to rationalize the experience. Maybe he was just really tired and his brain had played tricks on him. But that didn't explain the absence of any memory or how the time seemed to slip by unnoticed. He tried calling his friend Steve, who lived nearby, to talk it out, but as he waited for the call to connect, David couldn't shake off the gnawing feeling that something wasn't right. A few minutes later, Steve picked up. "Hey man, you good?" he asked. "Yeah, just a weird thing happened. You ever lost time like that? Like 2 hours just disappear?" "What? Nah, that sounds like you're watching too many of those strange podcasts you like," Steve joked, but his voice held a slight concern. "No, seriously," David persisted. "I was sitting here, and I checked the time. It was 6:30 p.m. when I got home. And then, I don't know, I checked again, and it was 8:30 p.m. No clue what happened in between. I swear, I didn't fall asleep or anything." "Man, that's creepy," Steve replied. "You sure you weren't just tired?" "Maybe you zoned out for a bit." But David wasn't convinced. He felt like his mind had betrayed him. Something wasn't adding up, and no amount of logical thinking could help him explain the unexplainable. His phone, his watch, even his own internal sense of time, they all confirmed the same thing. Time had slipped away from him. It wasn't just a moment of forgetfulness. It was something much stranger. After that night, David couldn't shake the feeling that he had been a part of something beyond his control. He tried to rationalize it again, blaming it on stress or fatigue, but deep down, he knew there was more to it than just a simple lapse in memory. The 2 missing hours remained a mystery, and as much as he wanted to forget it and move on, David's mind kept returning to that question. What happened during those 2 hours? Is it possible that David simply lost track of time due to fatigue? Or could it be something more sinister? A glitch in the matrix? A disruption in the fabric of reality? These missing hours have happened to others too, leaving them with the unsettling feeling that time, and perhaps their very existence, might not be as constant as they once believed. Story 3. The Double Encounter. John was an ordinary man, just like anyone else. He worked long hours as a lawyer, always rushing from one meeting to the next. On a particularly tiring evening, he was walking home from his office, the evening air crisp as it brushed past him. He had his mind on the long day he'd just had, thinking about his dinner plans and the work he still had to finish at home. The streets were quiet, with only a few cars passing by. The streetlights flickered on, casting soft pools of yellow light along the sidewalk. It was a calm evening, nothing out of the ordinary, until he passed a shop window. As he walked, John glanced at his reflection in the glass. At first, he thought nothing of it. It was just his usual tired face staring back at him. But then, something felt off. The reflection wasn't quite right. For a split second, John stopped in his tracks. His reflection wasn't mimicking his movements as it usually did. His hand was outstretched toward the window, but the reflection didn't move. It stayed still. The eyes in the reflection stared at him, cold and unblinking. It wasn't just a regular glance. It felt like his reflection was watching him, waiting for something. A shiver ran down John's spine. He stepped back, confused, his mind racing. He turned away quickly, trying to dismiss the strange feeling as nothing more than a trick of the light or his exhaustion playing with his senses. But as he continued walking, he felt a compulsion to look back. And when he did, his reflection was smiling. The smile wasn't one of familiarity. It wasn't his own smile. It was something colder, unsettling. A smile that seemed like it belonged to someone else, a person he didn't recognize. The reflection's lips were twisted into an eerie grin, one that looked almost predatory, as if it had its own agenda, its own thoughts. John's heart began to race. He was sure that the smile hadn't been there before. He didn't even remember moving his mouth to smile, yet the reflection was now doing just that. It was as though his reflection was not merely a reflection, but something alive, something that had its own will, separate from his own actions. His breath quickened, and he felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. His eyes stayed locked on the reflection for a moment longer, and in that moment, he could swear the reflection winked. He turned and rushed down the street, barely able to control his panicked thoughts. Maybe I'm just exhausted, John told himself, trying to rationalize the incident. But the feeling of unease wouldn't leave. The reflection stayed in his mind, burning into his memory like a strange, unresolved mystery. He had to get home, put the incident out of his mind. But that night, as John lay in bed, trying to sleep, he couldn't escape the eerie sensation that something wasn't quite right. His mind kept replaying the moment in the shop window. The cold stare, the strange smile, his reflection. Was it trying to tell him something? And then, as the clock struck midnight, John fell into a deep, restless sleep. The moment he closed his eyes, he was thrust into a dream. But this wasn't any normal dream. It felt different. It felt too real. John found himself walking through a city he didn't recognize. The streets were narrow, the buildings tall, and the atmosphere felt oddly distorted, like the world around him was made of glass, fragile, flickering with every step. And then he saw them. People. Or, at least, they looked like people. The thing was, they all looked like him. Different versions of himself, scattered all around the city, walking in different directions, staring at him with the same cold, emotionless gaze. At first, John thought they were just figments of his imagination. But as he walked further into the city, it became clear. They were real. They weren't just walking past him. They were following him. Their faces were distorted with the same unblinking eyes and unsettling smile. Every time he tried to escape, another version of him would appear. A taller version, a shorter one with glasses, one wearing a different jacket. But they all had the same eyes, the same smile. They were staring at him, waiting for something, watching him, as if they knew something he didn't. John's panic escalated. The city, once filled with a strange, distant beauty, now felt like a prison. He turned corners, running through alleyways. But no matter where he went, there was always another version of himself, watching, waiting, smiling. The strange city began to close in on him, the walls bending, the streets stretching, until he could barely move. He could feel their presence all around him, suffocating him. There was no escape. His heart was pounding in his chest as he looked around, helpless. He tried to call out, but his voice was drowned by the whispers of the versions of himself. They were speaking in unison now, chanting softly under their breath, the words indistinguishable but chilling. And then, just as John thought he would lose his mind, one of them stepped forward. It wasn't just any version of himself. It was the one with the cold stare, the one that had smiled at him in the shop window. It opened its mouth, but John couldn't hear it. He couldn't understand what it was saying. It was like there was no sound, just the motion of the mouth moving, as if it were trying to speak a language he couldn't understand. John's vision blurred, and suddenly he woke up. He gasped, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he sat up in his bed. The dream was so vivid, so real, that it took him a few moments to orient himself. He looked around, realizing he was back in his own room, safe. But was he? He looked into the mirror on his dresser, hoping that the reflection staring back at him would be just a normal reflection. But it wasn't. His reflection winked. John's heart skipped a beat, and the air around him grew thick with dread. He wasn't sure if he was still trapped in the dream, or if this was something even worse. Was his reflection trying to tell him something? Was it all part of a glitch in the fabric of reality? Or was he losing his grip on his own identity? John's encounter with his reflection marked the beginning of an unsettling journey, one that he couldn't escape. Every night, he was plagued by dreams of the strange city, and every day, his reflection seemed to become more and more unpredictable, as if it were no longer just a reflection, but a separate entity. Was it a glitch in the Matrix, or something far darker? John couldn't say. But one thing was clear: his reflection was no longer just a mirror image. It was something more. Story 4. The Unspoken Voice. Emily had always enjoyed the solitude of living alone. She had moved into her small, cozy house a few months ago, and after the initial adjustments, she had come to cherish her quiet evenings. The peace of being in her own space, without the hustle and bustle of roommates or family members, was exactly what she needed after long days at work. On this particular evening, she was sitting on her couch, wrapped in a blanket, binge-watching her favorite TV show. The warm glow of the television flickered softly in the otherwise dark room, the only sound the occasional hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. As she leaned back, completely engrossed in the show, a sudden chill ran through her. She paused the TV, thinking she had heard something, a faint sound, almost like a whisper. "Emily!" She froze. It was a soft, almost melodic voice calling her name. But the strangest part was, it didn't sound like it came from the TV. It sounded closer. Emily turned the volume up on the TV, thinking it might just be part of the show. But as the loud dialogue continued on the screen, she realized that it wasn't coming from the TV at all. This voice was real. It was unmistakable, and it was coming from somewhere else. Her heart began to race. She stared at the screen, trying to focus, but all she could hear now was her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. "Emily!" The voice spoke again, softer this time. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. There was no way it could have been part of the show. Emily had lived in the house for months now, and she knew the sounds it made. This was something else. This voice was coming from within the house, and it seemed to be calling her, pulling her into the darkness of the unknown. Her instincts screamed at her to stay seated, to ignore the voice and pretend it was nothing. But the curiosity, the creeping sensation of something out of place, was stronger than her fear. She stood up from the couch, feeling a shiver run through her spine. Slowly, she moved toward the kitchen. The voice seemed to grow quieter as she neared the doorway, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, somewhere just beyond her sight. She stepped into the kitchen, flicking on the light, but there was no one. Nothing but the faint hum of the refrigerator, the silence thick and oppressive. Her eyes scanned every corner of the room, the counters, the sink, the empty floor space, but the room was completely empty. She let out a breath of relief, dismissing it as her imagination getting the best of her. But just as she was about to turn around and walk back to the living room, she heard it again. The voice, louder this time. "Emily, come closer." The words sent a shock through her. It was as if the voice was speaking directly into her ear now, a whisper in the darkness. Her breath caught in her throat, her pulse racing. The kitchen suddenly felt cold, and every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if something was lurking just beyond the edges of the light. Frantically, Emily began checking every corner of the kitchen, opening cupboards and drawers, peering into the dark spaces beneath the sink. Her hands shook as she moved, but there was nothing. No one was there. No intruder. No hidden speakers or equipment. Just silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. She took a few steps back, her eyes darting from one place to another. Could it be that her mind was playing tricks on her? Was it some strange echo or sound bouncing through the house? She tried to convince herself of any logical explanation. But the voice, that voice, it sounded too real, too alive. It wasn't coming from anywhere she could see, and it wasn't something she could explain away so easily. Emily took a deep breath and called out into the empty room. "Hello," she said, her voice shaking. There was no answer. The house was silent once again. But then, as she turned to leave, the voice spoke once more. This time, it was closer, closer than before. "Emily, come closer." The words echoed through her mind as if they had been spoken in her very thoughts. It wasn't just the voice anymore. It was as if something was reaching for her, pulling at her very soul. A feeling of dread began to sink in. This wasn't just an echo. It wasn't just a trick of the mind. There was something in her house. Something that wanted her attention, that wanted her to come closer. She bolted from the kitchen, rushing back to the living room, her heart pounding in her chest. She grabbed her phone and dialed her best friend, Sarah, as she collapsed on the couch, trying to control her breathing. The phone rang and rang, but Sarah didn't pick up. Emily was left with only the pounding of her heartbeat and the oppressive silence of the house. She tried to steady herself, telling herself that it was just a figment of her imagination. But deep down, she knew that something wasn't right. The voice hadn't come from the TV. It hadn't come from a neighbor. It hadn't come from any of the usual places she could rationalize. It had come from somewhere deeper, somewhere she couldn't understand. She checked every room in the house, opening every closet, peering under every bed. But there was no one there. No one but her. The house, once a familiar refuge, now felt like a maze. And the more she searched, the more she realized that she wasn't searching for someone. She was searching for an answer, a reason. Was the voice a ghost? A spirit trying to communicate with her? Was her mind unraveling from stress and isolation? Or was it something else entirely? Something beyond her understanding? Emily turned back to the kitchen one last time, the voice still ringing in her mind. Was she hearing things, or had the house itself become a part of something much larger, something she couldn't escape? Emily never did figure out who or what was calling her name that night. The voice seemed to come from nowhere, but it left an imprint on her mind that never fully faded. Was it a ghost? A figment of her imagination? Or was it something more sinister? Something trying to communicate from beyond the veil of reality? Whatever it was, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the voice was trying to tell her something. And though she never heard it again, the house, once a place of comfort, would never feel the same. Story 5. The Sudden Rewind. Picture this. You're walking down the street, just another regular afternoon. The sun is shining, the air is warm, and the bustle of the city is all around you. You pull out your phone, your thumb swiping across the screen to check the time. It's 3:15 p.m. You tuck the phone back into your pocket and continue your walk. Everything seems normal. Everything seems right. But as you take another step, something feels off. It's subtle at first, just a feeling that you can't quite put your finger on. There's this faint, almost imperceptible buzzing sound in the air, like static or a glitch, as if the world around you is momentarily disrupted. You stop for a moment, wondering if maybe your mind is just playing tricks on you. You glance around, trying to make sense of it, and then you turn around. Everything looks exactly the same as before. The same people walking past you, the same cars driving by, the same buildings looming overhead. Yet, something is wrong. The people passing you seem a few seconds behind, their movements slightly delayed, as if they're stuck in a time lag. You take a deep breath, brushing it off. Maybe just a weird feeling. You continue walking. But then, as you step forward, you notice something even stranger. It's as if the world around you has shifted. The same people you just passed now walk past you again, in the exact same way, performing the exact same movements. Their steps match exactly as if you're seeing them repeat a few seconds before. The sound of footsteps on the pavement, the clink of a nearby bicycle bell, it all plays out once more. You check your phone again. It's 3:15 p.m. You frown. Wait a minute, didn't you just check the time? The clock hadn't moved. It was still exactly 3:15 p.m. The same moment, the same numbers staring back at you. You take another step, your heart now starting to beat a little faster. What is going on? Did you just experience some sort of déjà vu? You tell yourself it was nothing, a coincidence. But as you walk a little further, something unsettling happens. The buzzing sound is back. This time, it's louder, more pronounced. It feels like the world itself is glitching, like it's trying to realign itself. You take another glance around, and once again, it's like the world around you is replaying itself. The people, the same cars, the same sounds, all resetting to the exact same moment you've already experienced. It's like the universe just hit a rewind button, taking you back to an earlier time. Was this a dream? You check your phone. It's still 3:15 p.m. How could this be? You look around, checking the people passing by. Are they real? Are you seeing the same sequence again? But it's not just the people. Everything feels off. The streets look too perfect, the air too still, as if everything is locked in place, frozen in a loop. You're stuck in the same moment, trapped in some kind of temporal loop. Your mind races. What's happening to you? Was there some glitch in the system? A moment of déjà vu so intense that it felt like reality itself had cracked? You step forward, walking with more urgency now, feeling the oppressive weight of time bending around you. As you move, you check your phone once again. 3:15 p.m. The same time, the same moment. It doesn't change. It's as though time has stopped, or worse, it's gone backward, replaying the exact same scene over and over. You continue walking, hoping that this is just a strange anomaly, something your mind is conjuring up. But as you walk, the world doesn't change. The same people pass you again, their movements delayed. The same car honks its horn as it speeds past, only to repeat the sound moments later. The same breeze sways the leaves in the trees, but it's too precise, too orchestrated. It's like everything around you is stuck in a loop, as though someone, something, has reset the world, and you're the only one who's aware of it. The time, the people, the movements, they all feel like you've lived through them already. But you haven't. Not yet, or perhaps you have. A strange dizziness washes over you. You begin to feel as though you're falling out of sync with reality. The buzzing sound grows louder, then fades. You stop, your mind spinning. You take out your phone one last time, feeling your breath catch in your throat. 3:15 p.m. It's impossible. It's like time itself is stuck, like someone hit rewind on the universe. You take one more step, unsure of what's real anymore. And as you do, it happens again. The world resets, replaying itself in the exact same way. The same people, the same cars, the same sounds, all repeating over and over, like a record stuck on loop. You begin to wonder, was it all real? Was this a glitch? Or are you trapped in some kind of cycle, forever repeating the same moment in time? Each step you take feels like you're diving deeper into something you don't understand. The buzzing, the disorientation, the persistent feeling that something isn't right. You've just witnessed a glitch in the fabric of time, a moment where the universe itself seems to break down. Was it simply an illusion, a trick of the mind, playing with your perception of time? Or were you truly caught in a loop, a place where the past, present, and future merge into one? The truth is, no one knows for sure. But one thing is certain. Once you experience something like this, you can't help but wonder, if time can rewind, what else is possible in the world we think we know? Story 6. The Distant Echo. Michael had recently moved to a new city for work. The transition had been smooth, with just the usual challenges that come with settling into a new environment. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a tall building in the middle of a quiet neighborhood. It was a small, one-bedroom unit, perfect for a bachelor. The apartment had a comforting view of the street below, with rows of trees lining the sidewalks and the occasional car driving by. He felt a sense of peace there, something he hadn't quite found in his previous, busier location. One evening, as he sat in his living room, the low hum of city noise filtering through the open window, he was reading a book he'd been meaning to finish for weeks. The air was cool, and the only sound in the room was the faint rustling of the pages. But as he read, something caught his attention. A strange, distant sound, a faint whisper, almost too quiet to hear. At first, it seemed like just a trick of the wind. He thought maybe it was coming from the street below, or even from an open window somewhere in the building. He shrugged it off and continued reading. But then it happened again. Only this time, the whisper was slightly louder, more distinct. Michael. The voice was soft, yet clear enough for him to recognize. It was his name, spoken by someone who seemed to be far away. He immediately put his book down, frozen in place, his mind trying to process what he'd just heard. The voice. His voice. But it didn't come from inside the apartment, nor was it coming from anywhere nearby. The voice seemed to be coming from outside, from the street below, but it didn't make any sense. He stood up and hurried to the window, looking down at the empty street. The area was quiet. No one was walking along the sidewalk, no cars passing by. He leaned out a bit, scanning the dark street under the faint glow of the streetlights, but there was nothing. Just the stillness of the night. Confused, Michael shook his head, convincing himself it was probably just his imagination playing tricks on him. But as he sat back down and tried to refocus on his book, the same whisper came again. This time, it was louder, more distinct. And this time, the voice wasn't just calling his name, it was more like a beckoning. Michael, come closer. The voice felt like it was pulling at him, as if it were coming from somewhere just outside his apartment. His heart skipped a beat. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere in the street, but it was wrong. There was no way it could be. No one else was around. He stood up again, this time more quickly, and moved toward the door. He opened it, stepping out into the hallway, but the building was completely silent. The hallway was dimly lit, empty of any sign of life. He stepped back inside, shaking his head. The voice had been too real, too clear to dismiss. But when he checked outside, there was no one there. He couldn't explain it. For the next few nights, it happened again. Each time, the voice grew louder, more urgent. Each night, as the city quieted and he sat in his apartment, absorbed in the calm solitude of the evening, the same whisper would come, beckoning him. Michael. It always started off faint, almost like an echo, and then would grow stronger. Sometimes, he thought it was in his mind, just a lingering thought, an imagined sound, but the moments that followed always brought him to the same conclusion. The voice was real. It wasn't coming from anywhere inside the apartment. It was coming from outside, from somewhere in the street below. He would rush to the window each time, looking out into the empty street, but there was never anyone there. The city, for all its liveliness during the day, was quiet at night, and the street was always deserted when the voice called to him. One night, Michael couldn't take it anymore. He needed answers. He needed to know what was going on. After hearing the voice yet again, calling his name and growing louder with each repetition, he grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, but the sensation of being drawn to the voice was too strong to ignore. He descended the stairs quickly, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The street was as empty as usual. The dim streetlights cast long shadows, and the breeze rustled the trees gently. But there was no one, not a single person in sight. He walked further down the block, turning his head from side to side, but the street remained eerily still. He stopped at the corner, listening, hoping to hear something, but the street was quiet. The voice had stopped, as if it were just a figment of his imagination. He stood there for a few minutes, trying to shake the feeling of dread that had settled in his chest. But just as he was about to turn and head back to his apartment, the voice came again, this time from behind him, as clear as day. "Michael, come closer." His breath caught in his throat, and he spun around. He looked up and down the street, but there was nothing, no one. Just the empty stretch of pavement and the distant hum of the city. The voice, however, lingered in his mind, a chilling reminder that he wasn't just hearing things. With a pounding heart, Michael hurried back to his apartment, slamming the door shut behind him. He locked it, trying to ignore the echo of the voice that seemed to follow him into the room. The apartment felt too small, too confined, as if it were closing in on him. Over the next few days, the voice didn't come back. The eerie whispering seemed to vanish, and Michael tried to move on, although the unsettling feeling lingered. He would sometimes catch himself looking out the window, half expecting to hear it again. But it never came. The strange thing was, whenever he tried to recall the voice, it seemed to come from nowhere. It was as though it had been a part of him, something that existed in the shadows, just out of reach. The voice, always his own, seemed to belong to someone else. It was as though the boundaries between him and the world had blurred, like the voice had been trying to tell him something important, something beyond his understanding. Was it a glitch in the fabric of reality, or was it just his mind playing tricks on him, a product of the isolation and strange new city life? To this day, Michael doesn't know what happened. The voice that echoed in the empty streets calling his name grew quieter over time. But the memory of it, the feeling of being watched, of being pulled toward something beyond his control, lingers. Was it a supernatural event, a psychological breakdown, or something else entirely? No one can say for sure. But for Michael, that voice was a reminder that sometimes the world we live in is not always what it seems. Story 7. The Sudden Déjà Vu. Déjà vu. That odd, unsettling feeling that you've lived through a moment before, even when you're fully aware that it's happening for the first time. It's a sensation most of us have experienced. That fleeting moment where time seems to fold in on itself, and you're left wondering, how do I know this? But what if it's more than just a fleeting feeling? What if, in that moment, reality itself rewound, and you're trapped, living the exact same moment twice? That's exactly what happened to Tom. It was a quiet evening in late autumn. Tom had been working late at his desk, the glow of his laptop the only light in the room. The house was quiet. His roommates had gone out for the night, and the only sound was the rhythmic clack of his fingers on the keyboard as he typed away, deep into a project that seemed never-ending. Suddenly, his phone buzzed, the familiar ringtone breaking the silence. It was Carl, his old college friend. Tom picked it up, distracted, his mind still on the work he was doing. "Hey man, did you hear the news about the plane crash?" Carl's voice came through the phone, casual but tinged with the weight of the news. Tom blinked, a little groggy from lack of sleep, but nodded and said, "Yeah, I just saw that." He tried to shake off the fog in his brain, pushing aside the sensation that something was off. The conversation felt normal, but something about the words Carl said felt too familiar. After the call ended, Tom returned to his work. But that's when it happened, the first jolt of discomfort. Why did that feel like it happened before? Every word Carl had said, every move Tom made, from picking up the phone to responding to Carl's question, felt like he had already lived through it. He couldn't shake the feeling that this exact moment had played out before, but he dismissed it as fatigue. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him after a long day of staring at his screen. He glanced at the time on his laptop, 8:47 p.m. It was the same time he'd seen before the call. But there was something about the timing that didn't sit right with him. He stared at the clock on his screen, feeling the weird sensation intensify, like time had somehow stalled, stretched, or rewound itself. He shook his head, trying to focus. It was just a strange feeling, a trick of his tired mind. But then, just as he returned to his work, the phone rang again. The same ringtone, the same sound that had interrupted his concentration just moments before. Tom's heart skipped. He looked at the caller ID. It was Carl. Again? Was he calling him again so soon? Confused, Tom answered the phone. "Hey, did you hear the news about the plane crash?" Carl's voice came through, word for word, the same as the first call. Tom froze. The exact same words, the exact same tone, the exact same everything. His mind reeled. How was this possible? The conversation was identical, every word, every pause, every inflection. His body went cold. It wasn't just a déjà vu this time. It wasn't just a fleeting sense of familiarity. It was as though time had rewound itself. He had already had this conversation, and now it was playing out again. Tom couldn't believe it. His mind raced to process what was happening. He looked at the time again. 8:47 p.m. It hadn't changed. He quickly hung up and stared at his phone, his mind struggling to catch up with what his body was experiencing. Was it possible that he had just imagined the first call? Maybe the conversation had happened earlier in the evening, and he was just now remembering it. But even as he thought that, he knew it wasn't true. It had just happened. His fingers trembled as he checked his phone, double-checking the time. He stared at the clock. 8:47 p.m., exactly as it had been the first time. There was no explanation for this, no rational way to account for the repetition. He couldn't remember ever having such a clear, identical experience in his life. Tom grabbed his phone again and called Carl, his mind spinning with questions. As the phone rang, he thought about the sensation of being trapped in some kind of loop. It didn't make sense. Was he stuck in time? Or was it just his mind, overworked and exhausted, playing tricks on him? Carl picked up the phone on the other end. "Hey man, what's up?" Tom's voice shook as he said, "Carl, did you just call me again?" "You asked me about the plane crash." Carl paused, clearly confused. No, I didn't call you twice. We only talked once, man. You're kind of freaking me out." Tom felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. His pulse quickened. He had heard Carl's voice, had that exact conversation, and yet Carl didn't remember it. Carl had only called him once. Tom stood up from his desk, pacing around the room, trying to make sense of the situation. But it didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. He glanced at the clock on his laptop again, 8:47 p.m. The time was still the same, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was caught in a loop, reliving the same moment, over and over. Had reality simply rewound itself? Or was he trapped in some kind of mental loop, his mind caught in an endless cycle of repetition? Tom never did figure out what happened that night. Was it a glitch in the fabric of reality? A trick of the mind? Or was he caught in some kind of endless loop, repeating the same moment over and over, forever? Time and space, after all, may not be as fixed as we believe. And sometimes, when you least expect it, reality might just hit rewind. Story 8. The shifting face. There are moments in life when something seems just a little off, when the world feels slightly out of sync. Ethan, a young man who had recently moved into his own apartment, was living such a life. It wasn't anything extraordinary. He had a steady job, a quiet social life, and a small, comfortable apartment. But something began happening that would shake his sense of reality to its core. One evening, after a long day at work, Ethan was preparing to leave the house to grab some dinner. He walked down the hallway toward the door, passing by a large, full-length mirror that hung on the wall. Normally, he'd barely notice the reflection in passing, but that evening something caught his eye. Ethan glanced at the mirror as he walked by, but as he did, he froze. He looked back at his reflection. At first, everything seemed fine. His usual tired face, the faint stubble on his chin, his tousled hair. But something was wrong. Something was different. The change was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a trick of the light. His eyes looked a bit darker, a shade deeper than usual, like they had lost their warmth. His smile, something that was usually small, modest, even a little tired, was now too wide, too unnatural. His skin tone seemed slightly off, almost as if it didn't belong to him. It was him, but it wasn't quite him. A cold chill ran down his spine. Ethan blinked, thinking it was just a trick of the light, maybe a strange reflection from the overhead lamp. He quickly turned away, dismissing it as nothing. But as he walked out the door, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The unease gnawed at him, but he pushed it to the back of his mind. After all, it was probably nothing. The next day, as he got ready to leave again, Ethan passed the mirror. He wasn't looking for it this time, but the same strange sensation struck him again. He glanced at his reflection, and there it was. His face, slightly different again. The changes weren't as pronounced as the first time, but they were there. His eyes still seemed darker, his smile wider, but now there was something new. The angle of his face looked off, almost like his reflection was tilting in a way that wasn't quite right. The hairline seemed slightly higher, the contours of his face a little sharper. It was as though the reflection was subtly reshaping itself, like a distorted version of him was starting to emerge. He froze, a sinking feeling in his stomach. He tried to dismiss it, telling himself it was just his mind playing tricks. But the discomfort was growing, intensifying. He stepped away from the mirror, forcing himself to ignore it. Yet, over the next few days, the same thing kept happening. Each time he passed the mirror, the changes were more noticeable. His reflection was becoming less and less him. It wasn't just the eyes, the smile, or the skin tone anymore. It was like the reflection had a life of its own. The movements felt unnatural, like they were lagging behind him, mimicking him in an unsettling way. His reflection no longer felt like an extension of himself. It felt other, as if it belonged to someone else, someone he didn't recognize. One night, after a particularly long day, Ethan found himself standing in front of the mirror for a little too long. He hadn't planned on it, but something drew him back to it. As he looked, he realized the changes weren't subtle anymore. His reflection didn't look like him at all. His face was still almost familiar, but the features were wrong. His eyes were black, completely dark, like empty voids. His smile had turned into something grotesque, wider than ever, stretching far beyond what was natural. His skin tone was unnatural, like it had been drained of color, leaving him with a pallid, almost sickly complexion. The face staring back at him wasn't his. It looked like his, but twisted, distorted, like a mockery of who he was. The most unsettling part, the reflection was no longer mirroring his movements. Ethan raised his hand to touch his face, and the reflection did the same, but the hand in the mirror moved with an eerie delay as though it was playing catch-up. He quickly pulled his hand away, his heart racing. He took a few steps back, trying to make sense of it. What was happening to him? What was happening to the reflection? The moment he took his eyes off the mirror, he felt a shiver crawl up his spine. He turned his back to it, but something made him glance over his shoulder. And that's when he saw it. The reflection was still staring at him, but not in the way it should have been. The reflection was smiling at him now, a slow, twisted grin spreading across its face. It wasn't his smile anymore. It was the reflection of a face that didn't belong to him, a face that mocked him, twisted and distorted, with eyes that seemed to see him, watch him. He spun around, his breath shallow, and bolted from the room. He locked himself in his bedroom, but the image of that smiling reflection was burned into his mind. His thoughts raced, his mind spinning out of control. The reflection was no longer just a mirror image. It had become something else, something that didn't belong to him. For the next few days, he tried to avoid the mirror altogether. But the pull of the reflection was too strong. Each time he glanced at the mirror, the changes were worse. The face was no longer even close to his own. It was a completely different person, one that wore his skin but wasn't him. The eyes were black. The smile was wide and mocking. It was as though the reflection was trying to take over, trying to steal his identity, trying to become the person in the real world. One evening, Ethan couldn't resist. He stood in front of the mirror, staring at the face that wasn't his. His hand trembled as he reached out to touch the glass. He expected to see his own reflection in the mirror, but the face that looked back at him smiled. And then, to his horror, it winked. The reflection was alive. It wasn't him anymore. It had become something else. Ethan never looked into a mirror again. The reflection, that thing that had once been him, was now something far darker. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had replaced him in that mirror was still out there, watching, waiting. Was it a trick of the mind? A descent into madness? Or had something truly twisted reality itself, turning the mirror into a gateway for something that didn't belong in this world? Whatever the truth, Ethan's life was never the same after that. The mirror had taken something from him, something he would never get back.